Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here, and you're most welcome to the CMLS seminar. Nice, can you bring this back to me? Nice. So we are very happy to welcome you, but we are extremely happy to welcome Professor George Nagel. I hope I'm pronouncing well.
Around this.
So thank you very much. We're very happy to welcome you, and we'd like to thank Professor Alessandro Toppa for, because he is at the origin, he has invited Professor Nagel to Cairo, and this is why we have the privilege of receiving and welcoming Professor Nagel to the CMLS seminar. I was fortunate for having attended two of the workshops Professor Nagel has given at AUC, at the Department of Philosophy. This was an extremely rich experience for me, and I guess that your lecture today about the ethics of refugee policy, the overview would probably be a synthesis of what you did in the series of workshops that you organized at the new campus in the Fifth Settlement. Just a few words about Professor Nagel. Professor Nagel is a professor of philosophy at the University of Leipzig. He is the founder of the German Society for Analytic Philosophy, and he has written numerous books and articles. Professor Nagel has worked on humanitarian interventions from moral perspectives, and he has also looked from an equally moral perspective on terrorism and the manifestations of terrorism. We are particularly interested in his perspective on the ethical dimensions of refugee policy, and we're all ears, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to listen to you.
Okay, thank you very much for your kind words and for the invitation to take part tonight in this lecture. And I would like to thank you for the invitation to give the lecture, and I would like to thank too our colleague Mesa Ayoub for organizing the whole thing in the background, from the background. And I would include into my thanks also my colleague and friend Alessandro Toppa, who had prepared and organized and very well organized our joint workshop on the ethics of refugee policy at the AUC. And the lecture tonight is referring to this workshop. It is summarizing our main results, and those who attended the workshop get a summary in the end, and for those who could not attend, most of you, it will be preparing an overview of what's happening morally from the philosophical point of view on the continent of ethics. And I had promised you to give you some compass in order to orient yourself in this big maze of the refugee discourse. And I will do it. I will present you some maps of the landscape, very rough ones. The first one referring to the continent, and then we go into some particular departments. But you need not follow this lecture by making your own drawings. You can read afterwards everything I present here on the files, also in the net. You could get it in three ways. Either you go to my website at the University of Leipzig, and you will just enter it by giving in my name, Georg Meckle, or George Meckle, as you spell it, into the Google search machine, and there I'm sure you will find me very soon as a professor in Leipzig. And there's my website. And tomorrow these files will be presented on this website. Or second alternative, you go to my email, use my email and ask me by yourself, and I will send it to you personally. And on one of the files you will find my email address. Or again, you go to my mastermind at the AUC in Cairo, to my friend Alessandro, and ask him for help. So I'm sure at least one of these options should help. Okay, let's go to the first map. That's just the map of the contents of tonight's lecture. Namely, I will refer to ethics in general, and then specify down to refugee ethics. First, a general too, and then focusing on what I think is the main central problem. The main central philosophical problem as I see it. First part, ethics in general. Okay, ethics is the very center of a bright branch of different subfields. We have to distinguish between ethics proper, which is in the very center, and meta-ethics. Meta-ethics, as the name already is supposing, is the same as metaphysics is for physics. It's not physics by itself, it's not ethics by itself, but is reflecting on ethics. And this in two aspects. First one, it's referring to the concepts, the logic of the concepts used in this field, or it is ethics applied to ethics. It's a very strange thing, but unfortunately not very much practiced. Namely, there is an ethics on what an ethics has to do in order to be a good ethics. Perhaps we may come back as to many different points in the end. Okay, then we have to distinguish between, okay, I just see here's something missing on the right side. Namely, we would have to distinguish between descriptive ethics and normative ethics. Descriptive is just describing on what people think or what different cultures think about ethics or morals. It's a description, and so sociology is doing it, ethnology and some other branches. But normative ethics is the very ethics as I think it should be used and should be practiced and should be founded in philosophy, and so we are talking on normative ethics in the main. And this normative or descriptive ethics has to be distinguished, now we are on the left side, religious or secular ethics. Something got wrong with this file. You will get it correct tomorrow on the web. We have to distinguish between religious ethics on the one side and secular ethics on the one side. And when practicing philosophy, of course, you are taking the secular stance, which does not mean that you are anti-religious, but just abstracting from what the different religions are offering. That might be, let's say, part of the descriptive ethics, and you can take in these results, of course, and you should take them in. But you need not take a stance on these religious questions. And then we have the last distinction on the bottom, distinction between general ethics and specific ethics. General ethics is just, okay, everything you can say about what ethics is about, namely the presentation of the correct principles of morally correct behavior. That's the general task for ethics. But in specific fields, in medical ethics, for example, or in ethics of the techniques, there we have special questions. And here is the place where also topic of today, refugee ethics, has its place. It's a kind of specific ethics. Now to general ethics. There we have to distinguish again between different sorts of approaches to general ethics. We have to distinguish between absolute and presumptive principles of ethics. Absolute principles are meant to be absolute, without any exception. You have to follow the rules, and otherwise you will be unmoral. But some of these ethics, sorts of ethics, are up to the point, and notice there is no real absolute principle, no absolute rule in ethics. You will always have to make some exceptions. As we know, okay, it's forbidden to lie, but not in every circumstance. In some circumstances, not only it may be allowed, morally allowed, to lie, but even obligatory to you to lie, in order to, let's say, to rescue some human life. And so there's a conflict between don't kill and don't lie. And if you can't have it both, then you must make a decision. And that's, I think, the main question what ethics proper is about. To spell out principles for what to do in such kinds of conflicts. If there is no conflict, ethics is easy. But it has nothing to do with real life. Our real life is full of conflicts, and so we have to make up an ethics which is fitting to our situations, which is a conflicted situation. This is an example of what I meant, what an meta-ethics in the ethical sense should do. What I just did was apply to meta-ethical principles, namely just choose only those sorts of ethics which have some fit with reality, with conflicts. That's the first distinction in general ethics. The second one is on the right side. We have to distinguish between deontological and consequentialist approaches. To start with, consequentialist approaches is clear. Look at the consequences of what you are doing and take these consequences of what you are doing into account. And whether you are morally right or morally wrong depends also, not maybe exclusively, but also on the consequences. Whereas a deontologist, which comes from Greek, to deon, to do what is obligatory, does not look at the consequences. It's just again a kind of ethics as we know it from the 10 Commands. Don't lie, don't kill, that's your duty. No look to the consequences, whatever the consequences. And my verdict, of course, would be the same as also the verdict on against absolute ethics. So I'm more or less against deontologist ethics. The famous figure for a deontologist ethics had been the main German export article, namely Kant, the big philosopher Kant. And as you know that I'm a German, you will make perhaps the fallacy of concluding, oh, so he will be a Kantian. No, I'm not. Okay, another distinction is between universal and particular. Universal here means, okay, let's try to formulate an ethics which is not just the ethics for your tribe and for your family and for your nation and for your culture, but is covering all humanity. That would be universal. Whereas the particulars would say that's just impossible, and we will come across one of these particulars in the lecture. The particular says no, that's just impossible. Ethics as the main center of human behavior judgments is relative to cultures. And you have to specify the rules for correct behavior in relation to particular cultures. There is no universal perspective. I hope that this particular stance is wrong, but this, as all the other distinctions, would be a big topic for a long discussion. And then again, there is the distinction to the left between a rights-oriented ethics and an interest-oriented ethics. The rights may be to be distinguished again into legal rights and moral rights, and especially for human rights. And the interest approach has to be distinguished into the field of non-basic interests. Let's say you are interested in getting some cigarettes, or basic interest, so-called basic, and they are again correlated with basic needs. And it's the basic needs where the whole idea of human rights is founded on. And so you see already that the distinction between rights on the one hand side and interests on the other side need not be a very strict one. Otherwise we could not have human rights on both sides. We have human rights connected with our basic human needs, and try to spell out, of course, then in the language of rights as human rights. Okay, now there are a lot of different, very, very general principles we should have to discuss, but we can't, of course. I just mentioned some. The famous golden rule: do not to others what you want them not to do to you. That would be the negative version, or the positive version: do to others what you would want them to do to you. That's a very fundamental rule based in nearly every religion on this earth. And so, of course, if we are looking at something like a minimal ethics, an ethics which can be shared by all the people in the different cultures living in the different religions and so on, of course, golden rule would one of the best starters. Another principle is neminem ledere, and do not harm anybody. And that is the superior principle in medical ethics. In the Hippocrates oath, you are swearing that you will not do harm to your patients. And we have already noticed it, respite finem, look at the consequences. And then the principle most used in our context, and in the end I will end up by applying this principle, so just stick to that. Positive assistance is obligatory if it is urgently needed and its risk and costs are relatively low. So if your neighbor is in need, or somebody else is in need and you can help, and he definitely needs your need, you should give him the help. Now I just skip these differences to injustice. You can read them out in your homework next days, and come to the next part 2, refugee ethics in general. Here again we should distinguish between meta-ethical preliminaries, things which have to be clear in order to get a good start, and then not the normative part itself. And of course it will be the normative part again which should be at the center of the lecture to follow and our discussion afterwards. Now what I would like to present you is a construction of mine I just made up to be clear about what is the wide field of all of these questions which may arise when we talk on refugees. And I think especially in the context of ethics, that is to say in making moral judgments on what is the right thing to do with refugees. There I think a lot of different dimensions have to be taken notice of. Namely, we have to distinguish between, again, now you see the application from the general case to the particular case of refugee ethics. We have to distinguish between the rights and the interests, and in addition to that, the resources and the consequences, and maybe even the history of the refugees and those other sections of the society which are involved. And we have to distinguish between whether we are talking on individuals or groups of individuals or on institutions. And then on the side of the agents, we have to distinguish between the refugees themselves, their home or their departure state. Sometimes this state is called the sender states, but this is very misleading to my taste, because in most cases refugees are not sent but expelled, and that's a difference. And so you see, it's a lot of difference also in how you talk on refugees, and that, I think, it's one of the main jobs of philosophers, to get as clear as possible on how to speak, how to talk on this issue. And then we have to distinguish, of course, the present residence state, where when they have to fly, to take on the flight, where they are staying now, and then, of course, what is their intended, or if they are successful, their host state, and then some other institutions, maybe, or persons or groups, maybe just you, are you, or the United Nations. A small difference, maybe. Okay, and now to bring these dimensions together, I made up what you may treat as something like a magic cube. Namely, you have on the bottom the distinctions just between references, departure state, present state of residence, and then age, the host stage, or the other sectors. And on the left side, the rights, interests, resources, consequences, and history, and in addition to the individuals, groups, and institutions. And as in a magic cube, you can make turns and twists as you like. In this case, you have already a subdivision into 75 small cubes, which make up the whole cube. And if all of these different 75 cubes may be combined freely, you can imagine how many combinations you should respect if you are really going into what I call the logical space of what the different combinations might be in this field. Namely, it would be more than 5,000. You must be a mathematician, and he can summarize of how many combinations you have. But okay, I would like to give this small cube as my gift to my colleague, Professor Awad. And today we focus on the red lines, namely on the refugees themselves and the obligations of the host state, and forget about the rest. But the question then in discussion will be, is this abstraction already a wrong abstraction, or is it helpful? Okay, some short comments on these interests. Okay, we have already distinguished